Right, so if this isn't the ultimate example of absolutely nothing changing under Keir Starmer and the Labour government he now leads, having replaced the Tories after 14 years of their corruption and cronyism, I'm not sure what does. But if this is the kind of thing donations to Labour are capable of buying, in effect, then we should all be very, very concerned by it. And all the more so that this isn't being picked up widely with the media, because a Labour donor, a banker no less, who has donated some £20,000 to Rachel Reeves, our new Chancellor of the Exchequer, though given the economic nonsense that has spewed forth from her mouth since taking office, you could be forgiven for thinking it's just George Osborne again in a wig, has just been given a job working with her in the Treasury. Is she literally selling jobs there now then? Are donors able to buy their way into plum government employment? The optics of this is scandalous. Is our government infrastructure, the very running of governmental departments, now up for sale to the highest bidder too? Right, so this is a proper stinker of a story on the face of it. The sort of thing we knew the Tories loved to get up to. Jobs for the boys, contracts for their mates. The one instance springing to my mind as I was writing this was those pandemic VIP lanes, most notably Matt Hancock and how his horse racing set from his constituency couldn't possibly have had anything to do with Jockey Club head honcho Dido Harding getting that track and trace contract. Or did it? The cash involved, it's still unclear where all of that went. And Harding's husband was also a Tory MP, and John Penrose, who was farcically also the Tories' anti-corruption chief. The comedy just wrote itself, didn't it? But it seems Labour are going one step further, as on the face of it, it's very easy to interpret a party donor who made a large donation to a key Labour figure in Rachel Reeves, our new Chancellor of the Exchequer, being made a literal civil servant very shortly afterwards in her department, the Treasury, becoming one of the people who actually do the stuff of running government. It's extremely worrying if donors are capable of buying themselves into such positions, especially when they are bankers like Reeves was herself, and even more so when they are now influencing, essentially, the actions of the Treasury. Is he getting paid, or is Reeves going to get another donation off the back of this? Is he paying her, or is that already the deal done? How might he benefit himself being in the position he's now found himself? Has he had to set aside his business interest to take this role? How can we hold him to account? Well, the guy in question is Ian Corfield, who over the course of the last 9 years has donated £20,000 to Rachel Reeves. He'd also been a big-time donor to the odious Tom Watson previously. On the face of it, it appears he's been rewarded for that, alongside the fact he had been working as a senior business advisor to Labour since the beginning of this year, because bankers advising governments on business, well, that never ends badly at all, does it? Reeves is a former banker herself, of course. I'm sure bringing in another can't possibly make matters worse then. Anyway, I took a look at Corfield's LinkedIn page. It's always a good place to start when you're trying to find out about somebody you haven't really heard of. Helpfully outlines his experience, as it were, and his track record, and maybe he gives a bit of an insight into what his role within the Treasury might therefore be, because his job title of Director at HM Treasury does not really tell us very much at all. Corfield's background is very much rooted in the credit industry. From 2007 to 2012, he served as the chief executive of Australian bank Bankwest before moving on to become CEO at another bank in Australia called, well, rather imaginatively, I thought, Aussie, where he stayed for just a year before heading to the UK and taking up the post of Chief Commercial Officer at New Day. Now, for anyone who has perhaps had poor credit issues in the past, you might well know all about New Day, who offered poor credit cards on the market like Aqua or Marbles in order to supposedly help people rebuild their credit, with cards that have very high interest rates, as you'd expect for bad credit lending. But limit rises are very easily obtained and offered, substantial ones at that, and a lot of junk mail comes your way from them. And back in 2016, during Corfield's time there, New Day happened to fall afoul of the Financial Conduct Authority over unfair charges on store cards that it was offering. The likes of Debenhams and Topshop were examples of that, where redress of some £4 million between some 180,000 customers ended up being agreed. So, Corfield is something of a specialist in the bad credit banking scene, it seems fair to say, certainly according to what his LinkedIn page is telling us. It is where the vast majority of his banking experience appears to come from. So why does Rachel Reeves want such a person with her in the Treasury? Did he just buy his way in as the optics of the situation invite the obvious opinion of? Or is there a specific purpose she needs him and his help with? My concern here is that Reeves might be looking for some kind of banker-type answer to the cost of living crisis, where banks, their investors and their shareholders, whatever could look set to make a bank, so to speak, off the bank of people struggling financially due to circumstances beyond their control, making bank, so to speak, low wages, high bills, and rather than deal with the underlying causes of all of that, maybe she's looking for a sticking plaster to cover it up with instead, and a credit line to the poor for consolidation purposes, perhaps. Small, long-term, lower interest credit, maybe, not necessarily low, just lower, to help people feel better off rather than actually becoming better off by dealing with the underlying issues of the cost of living crisis. I'm looking for a reason for Reeves to choose to employ this guy, and this is based on what I've read about, what I've found out about him, looking at LinkedIn, looking at the few news articles. The conclusion I'm coming to, the alternative, of course, is that he just did buy himself a job, of course. However, you might be thinking by this point, Damo, government appointments like this have to pass muster. How can a donor possibly be allowed to be appointed like this? Doesn't Whitehall have to check these things off and ensure candidates to jobs are suitable? And surely they've done that. And you would be right, that is exactly how these jobs are vetted, how the people for it are looked at. However, there is no rule precluding a donor from becoming a civil servant. No rule has been broken in this appointment, which seems shambolic. But here's an excerpt from Politico that explains what has happened here in this case and why this has been allowed to happen. The government must meet stringent requirements when appointing senior civil servants, including holding a transparent and fair process open to competition. The Civil Service Watchdog, the Civil Service Commission, must also approve senior appointments. But the watchdog also has an exceptions rule. It allows appointments to be made outside the usual process and can apply in the case of temporary hires, secondments, or if an individual has highly specialist skills. The Civil Service Commission told Politico Corfield's hire was approved under this rule. This temporary appointment was approved by the Commission, recognising the need for the civil service to quickly bring in relevant skills for a fixed term. All appointments, by exception, are reminded of their responsibilities under the Civil Service Code to act with impartiality, objectivity, integrity and honesty, the Civil Service Commission said in a statement. So Corfield was allowed in via the exceptions rule because of his particular skill set then? A skill set that seemed to be based upon the bad credit banking industry. It's also a temporary appointment. I don't know whether being put through the correct checks can make that permanent later, but presumably it could. Other than that, Corfield is only wanted for a short period of time. It can be argued that this is because the Labour government is still very early days in and genuinely needs what it sees as the right people to get it going. But Reeves is already a banker, so why does she need another one? Or it can be seen, as I've seen it, this guy's skill set is in bad credit. Is there a move to help people short-term by potentially lumbering them with more debt long-term, in which case? That's my fear. For what I postulated a moment ago, there has to be a return on the investment, of course, always when you have investors involved. So the debt burden would have to grow with the interest applied to see that happen, to make it viable for those who would presumably finance it, because Rachel Reeves doesn't believe in financing anything with public money, does she? It's always private money. Whether Corfield has been brought in for a particular task, as his appointment being approved via the exception rule implies, or he's just a banker mate of Reeves and long-time donor, not so much brought in as bought in, just the mere fact another banker is now involved in the Treasury aside from Reeves herself, will bother a great many people, and certainly comment on this story on social media implies as much. For example, former Green Party parliamentary candidate Sharman Rahman said, "Wow, if a Conservative government had done this, there would have rightly been uproar. So far, very little given how controversial this appointment could be in terms of impartiality." Twitter user Katie quoted a piece from the Politico excerpt in her response. "There is no suggestion any rules have been broken by Corfield, Reeves, or the Labour Party. However, his appointment does throw a spotlight on civil service impartiality. Does anyone still believe the civil service is impartial? Certainly the civil service is supposed to be seen as such. But appointments like this certainly don't encourage confidence in the public that is true, does it?" And Timothy Barnes wrote, "So Labour complains about Conservatives working too closely with donors and then appoints one of theirs to a senior job in the Treasury, which is way beyond anything they ever accused Tories of doing. Double standards. And therein lies the rub, of course. Labour would have slammed the Tories for doing this, yet have invited the Tories to now lay into them over this. Fundamentally, nothing changes though when both of these parties pull the same cronyism stunts, yet one or the other always gets returned to power. So where is the pressure upon them to actually do any differently, to be better? There isn't any. They will only ever get worse because they have no fear of anyone coming into power acting contrary to that. Reeves needs to be made to explain this appointment in detail, and we need to keep an eye out for mentions of Corfield going forwards, because as much as Labour may well be getting slammed amongst those who know about this for, to all appearances, having sold a directorship in the Treasury, I think there's more to it. And given Corfield's background, it won't be to the benefit of ordinary working class people who Labour are meant to represent. Of course, even if Reeves were to come out and explain Corfield's precise role, there's always a matter of believing her. After all, she's lied through her teeth about a certain £20 billion shortfall in the nation's finances, claiming she didn't know anything about it. Well, we all did. We read the OBR report. We listened to it being talked about on the TV. So where was she then? How did she miss all that? Get the details of her dishonesty on that story, set to herald more Tory-style cuts and tax rises on us instead of the rich in this video recommendation here. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.